All right, guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about this. An Aero Precision lower with a 300 Blackout upper that I put together not too long ago. I'm actually really excited to talk to you guys about this because I spent a lot of time putting this rifle together, picking out all the pieces and parts, and we're going to talk about all of them and what drove me to make the decisions that I made on this particular rifle. This is a rifle. This is not a pistol. This is a stock, not a brace. All right, now let's go ahead and start off with a little bit of history. So last year, right before the pandemic kicked off, I picked up a matched Aero Precision upper and lower set. And in general, whenever I get a lower to build out, I am almost paralyzed with options because there's so many different things that you could do. I could build another 16-inch fighting gun. I could build a competition rifle. I could build a special purpose receiver, a pistol, an SBR. What caliber do I want it in? There's just so many options, and sometimes it's difficult to kind of like navigate through all of it. But as it would turn out, the pandemic would kick off, and I'd wind up being home a lot with quarantines and lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. So I had a lot of time to research every part of this particular rifle. And what I decided to do was kind of take an approach or take a look at the Q Honey Badger and kind of make my own twist off of that. Now, what is the Q Honey Badger? Well, the Q Honey Badger was a rifle system that was developed for an organization that said that they wanted to replace their MP5 SDs, but they wanted to do so with a purpose-built rifle that would be of a comparable length and have the suppressor capability and all that kind of stuff. So what was put together was a 7-inch 300 Blackout. This is kind of like when the 300 Blackout round came out. So it was entirely built around being a suppressor host and replacement for the MP5 SD, which is actually a really great use of the 300 Blackout. And I really think that's kind of the ideal niche for it, is ultra short rifles as well as suppressor hosts. So I decided to take a look at it, and then of course also the cheaper version of the Honey Badger, because it is like $3,000. The cheaper version, which is the Sugar Weasel. And I built what I refer to as my Splenda Gerbil. All right, so let's go ahead and start talking about the pieces and parts of this rifle in kind of the order that I put it together, which is different than what I normally do. It's going to seem a little chaotic. We're going to bounce around a lot, but it'll make it easier for me to be able to keep track of what I want to talk about with each one of these pieces and parts. Now, of course, we started out with the Aero Precision receiver set. Love Aero Precision, really big fan. They are my preferred receiver set. As you can see here, we have a brass deflector. That's pretty important if you have left-handed shooters in the family like I do. Some people like to omit these so that they have a more streamed kind of slab side type receiver going on. Also cuts off a little bit of weight, but I consider this to be good weight. We also have a forward assist. Now, forward assist is a hot button, get it, topic for a lot of people. Most people, there's a lot of people out there who are like violently against the idea of the forward assist, that it's only going to cause more problems than good. There's never been a problem that they've seen that was solved by a forward assist. When have you ever used a forward assist? Well, I actually use a forward assist quite frequently. So where does that conversation go now? And really, most of the time, guys, it's like anything else, all right? Everything has a time and a place. Every tool that you possess does something well, and that is when you employ it. If you try to use a wrench as a hammer, it's not going to work out that well for you. In this case, I generally wind up using my forward assist whenever I'm conducting some sort of administrative task. So I'm out on the range, say at a class, or perhaps at a competition or something like that, or maybe I'm getting ready to throw one of my ARs in the truck to take with me on a trip. Perform a little press check. That's a very common thing to do. A lot of times in classes, they'll have you perform press checks. Sometimes when you release the bolt does not go all the way in the battery. You don't have enough compression on the spring to really kind of get it that last little oomph. So sometimes you wind up having to tap the forward assist. That's the majority of the times that I use the forward assist, is just after a press check, making sure that it went all the way into battery. So I don't have a condition where I come up in a fight or whatever and have a click, no bang, because that's kind of a worst case scenario. That's definitely a thing that you don't want to have happen. So I've also seen forward assist be used in kind of dry, dusty climates. That it seems to be a time when maybe the bolt doesn't necessarily, because of friction, you know, if the weapon's not been recently lubed, it doesn't have the capability to go all the way into battery, and sometimes just needs a little bit of help. Now, I wound up dropping an Anderson Manufacturing lower ports kit in this. Standard GI trigger and all that kind of stuff. Nothing too fancy, nothing real crazy going on there. We do have all of our standard pieces and parts, so magazine release, bolt catch, single side, safety selector, all that kind of things, pretty much normal. Now you'll note this A2 pistol grip is not an A2 anymore, and that is because I dremeled off the A2 bump. I don't get bent out of shape on a lot of things with rifle grips, but I really don't like the A2 bump. And I don't know what happened. You know, it seemed a couple years ago they never really bothered me, and then the last couple of years it really started grinding on my fingers, and even like through gloves and stuff like that, I'll wind up with a hot spot. So I've now taken to removing A2 bumps. Now, a lot of my friends ask me why didn't I just like buy a different grip, and I'm not that worried about it that I need to spend the money to change out the grip entirely. The grip angle, while maybe not the greatest grip angle in the world, doesn't bother me. The shape or the texture, any of that type of stuff doesn't bother me. It's just the bump. So that was a really easy fix, and it didn't cost me any more money to do it. Let's see. Now, I want to talk about this dust cover. So dust covers, once again, that's kind of a fundamental aspect of the rifle that I think is really important. It gives you that opportunity to make sure that the system is nice and sealed up so that you don't have the possibility for the ingress of foreign matter or whatever that could cause the gun to chunk up. You know, yeah, all right, fine. Once you start shooting, yeah, the dust cover is going to be open. However, as soon as you're done shooting, you can close it and then guard against dirt and all that kind of thing. So I'm very habitual about making sure that I close dust covers. Now, this is a Strike Industries dust cover, and you might say, well, who really cares about the dust cover? You know, dust cover is a dust cover, right? Well, what is interesting to me about this particular dust cover is that it's exceedingly simple to install. There's just a little detent here, and then you just kind of pivot it up into place instead of having a pin that runs all the way across here. Now, is it difficult to do it in the standard way? No, not at all. It's not complicated. It's very easy to put together. This is just a teeny tiny refinement, kind of like the collar system on the Ruger AR-556. It's really easy to take those handguards off. It's not too hard to compress the spring on the standard setup to be able to take the handguards off of a rifle, but why not have just this little tiny refinement that literally costs manufacturers absolutely nothing to do, honestly, and it doesn't necessarily drive up the cost of the part as much as it's just a little tiny refinement that makes your life easier. I appreciate that. Now, this is an American flag kind of motif going on here. This is made of plastic. I don't get too bent out of shape on the materials that are used for dust covers. I just care that they are present. You can make this out of pasta for all I care. Well, maybe not pasta, because rain happens, but you get what I mean, though, as far as like, I don't care what material is here as long as it's stopping stuff from getting through. That's all I care about. All right, so enough about the dust cover. Let's go ahead, let's talk about our stock setup. Now, this is also from Strike Industries, and this is their PDW stock, which is a little bit different from what you would find on the Q Honey Badger. So the Q Honey Badger has a very proprietary setup, which also means that it has a proprietary buffer and spring that goes along with its proprietary bolt. And I didn't want to have those proprietary parts. I wanted to have standard AR-15 parts, at least when it came to the bolt carrier. So Strike Industries redesigned their carriers. Kind of difficult to do. They redesigned their carrier and spring setup so that you can use standard AR-15 bolts. Losing parts over here. So that is your buffer weight in this stock, and then you have a flat helically wound spring. Now, I did talk to Strike Industries at great length trying to figure out like what exactly that buffer weight was related to, and they were kind of wishy-washy on the answers. Ultimately, it wound up not being a big deal, and we'll talk about that more once we get to the barrel, but I really couldn't point you accurately and say that this is equivalent to like an H2 or something like that. Now, this is just a 2-position stock, spring-loaded, as I showed you just a little bit ago there. So you have closed and open. That's it. That's what you got. It is a very short length of pull. And what I especially like is that I have this cheek piece here attached to the receiver extension. And it is very comfortable. I don't really notice the rods of the stock itself. They do make this in a brace form, which is actually a little more expensive. Who would have guessed? I think it's probably a more popular seller for them, but I would highly recommend this stock if you're looking to do a PDW type build. All right, so we got the stock, we talked about the receiver and all the parts kits and all that kind of stuff. Let's go ahead and start talking about this barrel. This is a 6.5 inch 416R stainless with flutes. You can see them right there. Polyagonal rifled 300 Blackout barrel from V7. Now, I had some concerns early on when it came to barrels and all this kind of stuff. This is actually something that I spent a lot of time researching. And that is specifically because when you shrink rifles, you really start to play with some interesting dynamics when it comes to gas system and barrel length, dwell time, all that type of stuff. It really gets into how extraction and how effectively the gun's going to be able to run and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of things that you got to take into account with that discussion. And that was something that I was heavily researching for this particular build. Now, I ran across an article in doing this research from Soft Prep where a fellow did a 3-port series comparing a whole bunch of different super short 300 Blackout barrels ranging from like 5.5 inches up to 7 inches. And one of the things that you really got to take into account whenever you're talking about these short barrels and then also in 300 Blackout is 300 Blackout between supers and subs ranges from 110 grains to 220 grains with some outliers on either side of that. You're going to find a wide variance of reliability issues, especially once you shorten the barrel. It's something that you really got to take into account. So a lot of that article was talking about how on subsonics, unsuppressed, a lot of the guns were not locking to the rear. Now, is that a catastrophic failure? No, it's not like a bullet override or something like that. However, it is potentially catastrophic if you were in a fight and you come up thinking that you've got a round in the chamber and you get a click, no bang because the gun didn't lock back after the last round was fired. That's potentially an issue. I don't like hanging out with empty guns. Not a big fan, not in the middle of a fight at least. So, and, you know, we can also have a conversation going from there, like, well, then don't run 220s. But I got this right at the start of the pandemic, right? Which also means that I got it right at the start of the ammo shortage. To where, yeah, I wanted to run 125 grain rounds. That's originally what I wanted to kind of build this rifle around. However, couldn't find them. And it's a very real possibility that this is the type of thing you might have ammunition that you want to run out of this rifle, but that does not mean that that is what you're going to have when the fight comes. That doesn't mean that's what you're going to fight with. And I needed it to be able to run everything, or I wanted it to be able to run everything. That would have been my preference. I would consider that successful at that point. Now, what's interesting about this V7 barrel is it actually uses a proprietary length gas system with a proprietary height gas block. Now, this was concerning to me because one of my backups, in case I was having like gassing issues or something along those lines, one of my conceptual backups as I was designing this rifle was to utilize an adjustable gas block. Now, I don't like adjustable gas blocks just as a rule because like having to sit there and tinker and get something tuned up just fine for a round, and then once again we're in a condition where we don't necessarily get to choose what it is that we're going to fight with because the world ended or the ammo sales are done, you know, the shelves are empty, you can't get bullets that you necessarily want. Now you have to work with whatever it is that you got, and if you change up a factor like that, you have to take it to the range and make sure that it's going to function and adjust your gas appropriately. Well, if you don't get a chance to do that before you have to actually use the rifle, you know, worst case scenario, you actually have to fight with it, you're not sure if that's going to run properly, and that's an issue to me. That's unsustainable. In practice, that is unsustainable in the actual application of a working type rifle like I wanted this to be. So I contacted V7's customer service, and they put me on the phone with a fellow named Joel, and he and I had a good long talk, kind of bouncing back, spitballing different ideas about things it is that I could do, told him the information that I got from Strike Industries as far as what this buffer weight was and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, he was actually very surprised from the Soft Prep article when I told him about that, because when V7 designed this barrel, they actually pretty much decided to drop off trying to tune that gas port for subsonic ammunition without suppressor. That they just how he said it to me, in the range of possibilities of bullet weights, they considered it. They kind of had to pick something and see what it was they were going to work with, and they decided to tune that gas port and that barrel around supersonics, and then it would run subsonics suppressed effectively. He was very surprised to find out that the rifle was actually working with subsonics unsuppressed quite well. So I finally got the confidence boost that I needed out of it. I went ahead and ordered this barrel, got it installed, and it has functioned flawlessly. We'll talk about that more once we get to shooting. However, what I also found out in this process, who Joel was. Joel is actually the owner of V7, which I thought it was pretty cool that he was, answering phone calls and questions and all that kind of stuff. He even told me to call him back if I had any issues or any other questions, and make sure that I asked for him specifically. And I really appreciated that little flair customer service, especially since, guys, this is before I started the channel, just a little bit before I started the channel, and it's not like this is a big channel to begin with, so he's getting free advertising in this case. He's not paying me, I'm not in his pocket or anything along those lines. He's also, Joel, specifically in V7 as a business, it's also just genuinely nice people who want to make sure that their customers are getting the product that they need, and it's doing the stuff that they need it to do. I appreciate that. All right, so now why 416 stainless in a medium contour? So stainless steel barrels are not my favorite. I generally associate stainless steel with someone trying to get better accuracy out of something. They have a little less longevity and all that kind of stuff. So kind of like an 18 to 20 inch special purpose receiver type build is where I would think that a stainless steel barrel would better fit. However, this thing had such great reviews, and I was just tickled with the company. I decided to just go ahead and kind of try out a stainless steel barrel this time around. Now, one of the great things about stainless steel is that it does take a little bit longer for it to heat up, which I appreciate. However, to go along with that, it also takes it longer to shed its heat. But the fluting, in theory, should help out with that, because I get greater surface area for air to be able to interact and try to whisk some of that heat away. All right, now let's talk about the handguard. What I have on here currently is a UTG Pro 5.5 inch handguard. Now, one of the things that I was looking for with the handguard was to make sure that it covered my gas block, because I don't want to potentially expose my gas block to damage. I'm really, really dead set on that. And as we can see here, I got it like perfectly. It is right there. It's right there in line with the rail. Now, this was not the rail that I originally started off with. Originally, I started off with this Angstadt arms. I believe this is a 6-inch rail. However, I ran into an issue with this fairly quickly. Now, I like this because it is a very lightweight design, and this gun right now is kind of a boat anchor, because that M-Lock, that UTG Pro is quite heavy, as it would turn out. But I got everything assembled right, took this thing to the range, and I took this rifle out, and I was shooting it, and everything's going really well, function's going great, and there was a little lull in the shooting, so I decided to go ahead and inspect the rifle, make sure that nothing had come loose. I wasn't potentially going to run into a condition where myself or others were going to be injured by the rifle falling apart. And I noticed that the handguard was walking off the barrel net. That was a surprise to me. I pulled out my toolkit, I put the barrel back, I put the handguard back to where it was supposed to be, and then shot a couple more rounds out of it and saw that it was continuing to do it. So the next thing that I did was I took it home, tinkered with it a little bit, took it to a gunsmith, handed it over to her. She took a look at it, stripped everything, pulled it all apart, inspected to make sure that the screws didn't like rip out their threads or anything like that, make sure I didn't over torque it or anything along those lines. And then I took it back out to the range, and it continued to keep walking down the barrel nut. So I contacted the manufacturer, sent them the barrel nut, or sent them the handguard. Let's see, I sent it out on a Friday. It arrived on a Monday in the morning, and by lunch I got a notification that it was headed back to me. I got an email from them stating that they had been unable to replicate the issue. So got it back, took it to my gunsmith, said, here, put the entire upper together, eliminate me completely as possibly being the issue here. Let's see how this goes. So she put it together, handed it off to me. I took it to the range, shot it, and it continued to walk down the barrel nut. So brought it back, put it all back together, took it back, like ripped it apart, put it back together, took it to my gunsmith again. She looked at it, ripped it apart, put it back together, and then took a hammer and tapped on the rail and got it to walk down the barrel nut. I contacted the manufacturer again, told them what happened, and they told me that I must have stripped out the screws, that I am the issue, and they have no interest in continuing this conversation. So I immediately got rid of this, and I got the UTG Pro Handguard, and I've been much happier with it, and it was also much cheaper than this Handguard was. I think the issue is, if you look at this setup here, there is nothing about the Handguard that locks in against this barrel nut. So it's entirely friction fit. And I guess in this short of a setup, you know, pounding back and forth, equal opposite reaction type deal, setback, whatever it is that you want to call it, this Handguard was not capable of being able to stay together. Maybe it wasn't built with 300 Blackout in mind, but that's not what their literature claims. So with that being the case, I have zero interest in buying any Angstadt Arms products. I was actually, as much as V7 and Strike Industries were absolute wins when it came to customer service, Angstadt was a pretty big downer, and I have zero interest in buying any more of their products. If you guys do, go ahead. I'm not going to tell you how to live your lives, but keep this interaction in mind if you ever have to talk to their customer service. Let's close this up before I cut myself on it, huh? All right, so Handguard's in place now. Everything's going great. It's a boat anchor, but it works. Now let's talk about our muzzle device. So I spent a lot of time going back and forth on the muzzle device as well. The only thing I knew for sure was I did not want a muzzle brake. Already we're talking about a short setup, which means that we potentially, it takes 9 inches of barrel for the powder to burn up for 300 Blackout. Excuse me. So I was definitely going to have unburnt powder. I was going to have a lot of muzzle flash, potentially a lot of concussion going on. I didn't want to do anything to add to that. So no brakes right off the bat. And what I heavily debated for a very long time was flash hiders or linear compensators or blast forwarding devices, flash cans, whatever it is that different manufacturers call this cup that goes on the end of the barrel that's supposed to direct all the blast and hot gases in a single direction. And a lot of people really like them on short builds because it redirects the blast away from you so that it's not as concussive on your own hearing. However, if you utilize those in confined spaces, that blast is still going to bounce back off you, off of walls and stuff like that. So it's not like a get out of jail free card. It's not more or less like a cheap suppressor at that point. There's still going to be blast. So that was kind of an issue, but I noticed that quite a few manufacturers seem to have a hybrid type setup where you could have a flash hider, and then if you wanted to, you could thread on a flash can over top of it. I found that very interesting, especially since, I looked at the, once again, we're kind of building this around the idea of the Honey Badger. And I looked at the Honey Badger, and it utilizes the Q Cherry Bomb muzzle brake. So, of course, that's off the table right off the bat. But suppressor host is the other thing that I wanted this to be able to do, though I haven't gotten a suppressor for it yet. I'll let you guys know when I do. But what mating surface was it using in order to be able to diminish the possibility of there being a wandering zero whenever it is that you attach your suppressor? Because that's something I always think about with suppressors. I don't want to have a lot of zero shift. So what the Cherry Bomb uses is a taper lock type method. So you have your threads, and then you have a tapered surface close to the threaded area which the suppressor is going to interact with, and then that gives you a more repeatable zero, a more predictable zero, instead of like getting all wonky and shifty all over the place. So I started looking around for other taper lock type attachment points, which there's a lot of other ways that you can attach and all that kind of stuff, but one of the things that I found interesting about the taper lock type method was that there were a lot of people who build taper lock type accessories also have those add-on linear compensators that you can then thread onto those suppressor mounts. And that was something that I really liked. So I wound up going with a Griffin Armament 3-pronged stealth flash hider, with the understanding that if I had any issues with too much muzzle flash or blast, I would add a linear compensator over top of it. However, I am happy to report that that has not been necessary, that this has been this is actually not as much muzzle blast as you might think for how short it is. Like, that actually surprises a lot of people. Every time I take this thing out to the range, they expect there to be a lot more of a fireball, and that's not really the case with this.
All right, let's turn this thing to the left instead of the right.
All right, so at some point I will add probably a Griffin Paladin suppressor, but for the moment we're just running this thing as is. All right, so charging handle. Let's talk about the charging handle for a minute. Originally I had an Odinworks extended lash charging handle. However, I wound up taking that off of this and putting it on my do-all build, which I've previously reviewed. I'll put the link in the description. And went and put its more or less standard charging handle back on this rifle, and that it works fine. The other rifle has a 1-to-6 power optic on it, so these small latches are kind of difficult to get around a scope, whereas that Odinworks works pretty nicely for that. All right, now let's talk about the bolt. So because I'm using this Strike Industry stock, I can use a standard AR-15 bolt instead of some sort of weird wonky proprietary setup. And for that, I decided, well, this is another thing that I did a ton of research on. Originally, I wanted to kind of build this rifle around steel-cased ammunition. Now, somebody is probably thumbing their nose at me on that. Let me explain. So, 300 Blackout to me, for a long time, was not very interesting because the ammunition was expensive and it was a little bit more difficult to find. So there were two things that I was looking for, two indicators to show that 300 Blackout had hit an acceptable cost availability dynamic for me. One was Walmart stocking it, which Walmart decided to get political instead of just being a retail service, so now they don't stock any sporting rifle type ammunition, only hunting type ammunition. And then also for it to be available in steel-cased ammunition. Not because I wanted to default to running steel-cased ammunition, but so if I was in a condition where I needed to get a case of ammunition fairly cheap to take to like a course or a competition or something like that, I would be able to buy cheap steel-cased ammunition in order to be able to train with the rifle in a high round count type situation. Or, again, with the ammo shortage and all that kind of stuff, you might be stuck in a condition where all you can get is steel-cased, and I wanted to make sure that this rifle would run effectively steel-cased. Now, the problem with steel-cased is steel-cased ammunition expands, where brass-cased ammunition, once pressure drops, contracts, and you run a lot of issues with that right off the bat with dwell time and all that type of stuff in short-barreled setups. So extraction force is going to go way up, and that was one of the things that you have to take into account whenever it is that you're putting these kind of things together, especially when you have the opportunity to make the rifle work the way you want it to. So initially what I wanted to get was a Lewis Machine & Tool lobster tail extractor, their enhanced bolt setup. Now, their lobster tail extractor has greater overall surface area for contact with the actual cartridge casing lip, as well as two springs in order to give it more extraction force. That's what I wanted originally. However, they were sold out. I was like, oh, well, that's a problem. I also was looking at a variety of different adjustable gas bolts so that if I ran into any functional issues, I would be able to switch over to that. Also, the one thing that we haven't taken into account so far is suppressor use. Suppressors are going to weigh up the pressures going on inside of this rifle. It's going to really change that dynamic with extraction. So that was something that was a refinement that I wanted for suppressor type use. However, I don't even have a suppressor yet, so that's something that I'm looking forward to as an advancement later on. When I do get a suppressor, I'll also get the adjustable bolt, and I'll probably also get the LMT bolt head. What I did wind up going, that was a very, very circuitous story to get to the point of what I got right here, which is a Right to Bear Arms, which is a nitride-coated 9630 steel bolt. Now, there are a couple things that I did add in. I did get a BCM spring kit for the extractor so that I could have a stronger extractor. However, one of the things that I was concerned about, and it hasn't shown up yet, but I'm keeping an eye out for it, is that great, I increased the extraction strength with the spring. However, I'm still contacting the same overall surface area, so there's a higher probability now that if I have a cartridge casing that's swelled up and doesn't want to come out of the chamber, that I'm just going to rip the case rim instead of actually extract the cartridge, because I'm putting more force on a smaller surface area. But it hasn't been a problem so far. Let's hope it stays that way. Now, also, I decided to go with a domed cam pin from Landtac, and I did so because that's one of the issues, especially when you potentially have this thing picking up a lot of energy and flying back and forth and all that kind of stuff. You can wind up beating the upper to death. So I decided to go ahead and guard against that by putting in this domed cam pin. And let's take a quick look, see how that's going. I see a little bit of marring right on the shoulder for the travel area for that cam pin, but for the most part, I think it's doing its work. All right. So there's our bolt. There's pretty much our full up functioning rifle. Let's go ahead and talk about the accessories that I put on it. So right off the bat, I went with these PRI fixed iron sights. These were not my first choice. However, parts have been scarce quite a few times, and I was having trouble finding Magpul flip-up sights. So I wound up getting these PRIs. They're not bad. They kind of have an HK type look to them. I have 2 different sized apertures here in the rear. I keep the large aperture up for most of the time. It does become a little convoluted with the optic to kind of sight through all this stuff, but they're durable, good iron sights overall. At some point, I will replace them with a flip-up type setup, though, just so I can kind of streamline this setup and not have as much stuff kind of hanging off of it. Now, the light that I went with was the Enforce WMLX, which has a IR capability. This, unfortunately, is not a release type setup. You do have to press it twice, and it does have a strobe function, as you see there. I did have a little bit of an issue with Enforce on this particular light. I ordered it direct from the manufacturer and realized afterwards, when I didn't get a confirmation or anything like that in my email, that I had fat fingered my email. So I emailed them. I emailed their customer service trying to get a hold of them to let them know what had happened so that I could get the, the shipping notices and all that kind of stuff sent to my email, and they did not reply. I called the manufacturer multiple times before I finally got somebody on the phone to describe what happened and have them re-email the confirmation number. That was very irritating, and also it took so long that by the time they actually got me the routing information, it was in my mailbox. Kind of a loss. Now, once I finally got somebody on the phone, they were very nice, but there was this big excuse thing that apparently they had not gotten my email or any of my messages, and I have, seeing as I left like 3 messages, it's very difficult for me to believe that. So I kind of stopped doing business with Enforce, which they've already got me. I have like 3 of these lights on different rifles, so it's not like it's really hurting them or anything like that. I don't have any intention of buying new lights from them. Now, a lot of people do kind of complain about these because they are of a plastic construction, and I guess they are not terribly durable. However, I've not had an issue with them so far, and I mean, I'll just keep monitoring for it, and I'll let you guys know if I do. But with them being made of plastic, they are very lightweight. I do appreciate that. Now, our primary optic, is an Aimpoint PRO, which is the patrol rifle optic. It's 2 MOA dot, just a single dot, and it is more or less the cheaper version of the Comp M4. It's got all the same layout, pieces, parts, all that kind of stuff. I do think they used a little softer metal for the actual housing, but this is a Comp M4 at half the cost. Huge fan, and I really like this optic. It's kind of big on this particular rifle, but it's also a fairly wide viewing area to be able to, contend with not just having my iron sights in it, but also be able to get on the dot and run it appropriately, which, especially taking this kind of both eyes open, everything else kind of fades out, and I just notice the dot and kind of drive that to the target and all that kind of stuff. And then if need be, You know, I do have absolute co-witness and all that kind of stuff, and if need be, I can drop onto the irons if for some reason my dot just winked out on me. You know, it died or anything like that. This does use a proprietary battery. It's a N-type, just like the old Comp M2 uses, which is kind of a miss. I'm not a big fan of that battery. However, the battery life on this is nice. It is very nice. That's one of the things that I love about aim points. And also, they're super durable. So like I said, I think this has a little bit cheaper of an actual housing, but I don't think it's any less capable as an optic, especially for the average user who's not necessarily like bouncing these around a Humvee or something like that. I think you'll get a lot, like a lifetime's worth of use, multiple lifetimes worth of use out of this optic overall. It does come with this thumb screw QD setup and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely love it. Always been a big fan. Love aim point optics. All right, I do have a Magpul QD cup mounted on here. We have a QD cup in the stock back here. And the sling that I'm running is just a nylon sling. 2-point non-adjustable nylon sling. At some point I'll upgrade it, but for the moment it's not the all-encompassing thing that I'm concerned about as much as just making sure that the rifle functions. Now, magazines. Important thing to do with your 300 Blackout magazines is go ahead and designate some for 300 Blackout and mark them in some manner. I went with some penguin tape. I have a couple of these set aside. These are just standard GI mags. I haven't had any issues functional wise with them, and I've marked them appropriately because you would not want to be out on the range, pick up your 300 Blackout mag and shove it in a 5.56 gun. There's a lot of videos out there of people doing that, and it ends poorly every time. All right, guys, we got through all the features. We got through everything. How does it shoot? Lights out. That is how it shoots. Get it? Blackout, lights out. All right, anyway. So, you guys are here for my terrible humor, right? So, now these groups were done at 50 yards. I'll roll in some 100-yard groups. I don't have any currently for you, but at least as of when I'm filming this. The worst group on here is 1 1/8 inch. The best on here, I have 2 half-inch groups at 50 yards. That is fantastic for a 6.5 inch 300 Blackout, especially since a lot of people claim that like 300 Blackout's not a terribly accurate cartridge, which I always found to kind of be a silly thing, aside from like manufacturing tolerances and like, you know, having some wiggle room and standard deviations and like velocities and all that kind of stuff. The cartridge doesn't have as much to do with accuracy as much as perhaps the shooter and the rifle has a lot to do with the accuracy aspect of it. The cartridge isn't completely lost on the burden of accuracy, but there's a lot of other factors that play into that, and this thing is excellent when it comes to accuracy. Now, I have run this in a competition as well, and it was a blast. It was really easy to work this thing around corners and all that kind of stuff. And in my house, this thing pies corners amazingly, and I have a lot of very tight corners to work, and this little setup is fantastic for it.
He lays in bed at night.
All right, so what is this to me? This is my personal defense weapon. This is my PDW. It's a truck gun, at least for in-state type travel because I got to put in a whole bunch of additional paperwork because it is an NFA item and I do have to notify the ATF every time I want to cross a state border, which is troubling because I live right on a state border. However, it's not been an issue. It is absolutely fantastic to take this thing out with me. It is so tight and compact, especially working inside of like my truck or something along those lines. So then I forgot to talk about accessories wise, and I'm sitting here holding it this whole time. This is actually a grip pod that I cut down to a stubby to give me a little bit more surface area to be able to work with those on this rifle, because trying to kind of wrap around like this to work the rifle is really uncomfortable, but being able to get that vertical grip on there is excellent. It really changes the dynamic of working around this rifle, and it's not in any other weapon at this point because it's already a rifle. It's already a papered SBR, so I can put whatever grips I want on it, regardless of length and classification. All right, so this has been a fantastic little personal defense weapon. This is a part of my concealed carry setup. I have a box, a Pelican case, lockable Pelican case that I've already got cut out from the foam and everything for this, as well as the magazines and anything else that I need to throw in along with it, so that when I take it traveling, I can make sure to secure it appropriately. All right, now, did I succeed in kind of replicating my own version of the Honey Badger? I would say so. I think this came off wonderfully, and it uses fewer proprietary parts than the Honey Badger does. My Splenda Gerbil is a success overall. All right, guys. I hope you found this interesting. I know this is definitely one of the longer videos I've done in quite a while, but we had a lot of stuff that we had to talk about with each individual part because I spent a lot of time researching and really digging deep into making sure every aspect of this rifle was exactly how I wanted it. I don't build AR-15s to be cheap. Like, a lot of guys are like, oh, I could have built that way cheaper, and you'll hear that same thing said about a lot of, build versus buy and all that kind of stuff. I don't build rifles to be cheap. I build rifles because I want to get a performance aspect out of them that I don't necessarily think I can get out of something that's already on the market, or I want to achieve a performance aspect of it for maybe less. That's the closest I get to the budget building mindset. It's like, I think I can build that just as effectively for less money, and that's why I sit down and I pick through, and I don't necessarily choose parts based on cost. I choose parts based on value. So this entire rifle came together for about $2,200, maybe a little bit more. I have to recrunch the math on it, but this came around right around $2,000, all said and told. Optics, all that kind of stuff added in, tax stamp, everything that went along with that, about $2,000, right around there, maybe a little bit more. I have to retally, and I'll throw it in the description once I actually tally up what the overall cost was, including having to buy 2 handguards, what it is that I have in this rifle. But this has been a fantastic investment, in my opinion. As much as I sometimes stress out a little bit about different aspects of the NFA that kind of make moving with this difficult, and I do move frequently, but at least for the moment, I am very happy with this setup, and hopefully at some point in the future we'll be able to do a little bit of a check-in with it, having a suppressor. I look forward to that. One of the great things about starting off with something that's so short to begin with is that when I add a suppressor, this thing's going to be the length of like a Mark 18. Right now, this overall length with muzzle device installed is coming in at about 24 inches. It's excellent. That is a fantastic length overall, and I'm very excited about it. All right, guys, that's enough gushing about this particular rifle. I hope you guys found this interesting and helpful, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.